Panda, the black and white fluffy bear that only lives in China, is widely loved by many people around the world. However, very few people know that it is only in the past 70 years that pandas have become a national treasure in China, and to the Chinese, pandas are more often seen as cartoon characters than real pandas. In the past, pandas were actually used for fur by the Chinese. American biologist and naturalist George B. Shaler wrote in his 1993 book, The Last Panda, the Chinese used to hunt pandas for their pelts because they believed that sleeping on it would ward off evil spirits and help regulate women's menstrual cycles. Panda meat, however, didn't make it into the Chinese recipe like many other wild animals because it was too unpalatable. In overseas countries, we can only see pandas in zoos, and it is seen as a symbol of conservation with the impression that they are hard to breed and are at risk of extinction. In fact, the panda was deemed no longer endangered in 2016 and is now regarded as a vulnerable species, while the polar bear, that is lower in numbers, receives less attention. One myth always circulates in people's heads. Are pandas incapable of reproducing in the wild? According to William McShay, a panda expert at the Smithsonian Institution, in the wild, male giant pandas congregate at the top of ridges in spring, while females travel long range, one after another to the male, and maintain intensive mating activity throughout the season. However, zoos and captivities are unable to simulate these conditions, and they keep the females separate from the males except for the few days in a year when they are able to mate. Since there is no natural mate selection in captivity, mating has been very rare. Most captive breeding is the result of in vitro fertilization. Captive pandas do not have well-developed survival skills in the wild, and many of them spend their entire lives in artificial environments. According to the WWF, although the number has increased, there are still only 1,864 wild pandas in the world, with more than 600 pandas in captivity worldwide. However, the Chinese authorities have never released the total number of captive pandas in China. Why? It is related to the confusing panda management system in China, which we will look into later. It is easy to understand that as the number of pandas increases, they will become more common and their value will decline in the market. Controversies that the continued captive breeding of giant pandas are not for the purpose of real conservation have been around for a few decades. The interest of Americans in pandas began when American fashion designer Ruth Harkness brought a baby panda from China in 1936, and between 1941 and 1946, the Republic of China gave 3 pandas as diplomatic gifts to the US and the UK. After the Chinese Communist Party seized power in 1949, its leader, Mao Zedong, adopted the same strategy, giving pandas to communist countries in the same camp. However, after Nixon's visit to China in 1972, CCP leader Deng Xiaoping presented him with 2 pandas as a gift to establish diplomatic relations, which formally initiated the CCP's panda diplomacy. Since then, the countries receiving pandas have mainly become rich capitalist countries instead of communist countries, and there are 2 major reasons for this. Firstly, China used pandas to improve its image in order to deepen its relationship with the countries. Secondly, these countries could offer China valuable capital and technology in exchange. If we take a look into history, among the diplomatic agreements related to Panda, many of them involved energy, technology, automobiles, national defense, and trade agreements. After seeing the opportunities brought by the pandas and the conservation pressure from overseas, China announced in 1982 that it would stop gifting pandas and would lease them to overseas countries instead. The fee to lease a panda starts from $1 million USD per year, with a maximum term of 10 years, renewable. If the pandas give birth to offspring, the leasing fee will be increased by 600,000 USD per year for each offspring, and the offspring automatically belong to China and have to be returned to China before they are 3 years old. Zoos often lease pandas in the hope of attracting tourists and for more profit, but pandas are the most expensive animals in zoos, costing up to 5 times as much as keeping elephants. Food alone is a huge problem. While the bamboo is a staple food in a panda's diet, pandas will sometimes hunt for pikas and other small rodents as they still have the digestive system of a carnivore, as well as carnivore-specific genes. There have been phenomena of omnivores feeding pandas in the wild. However, under the Chinese government's requirement, captive pandas are only provided with bamboo as food, and the bamboo has to be transported by air from China to the local area, resulting in high transportation costs. Bamboo is very low in nutrients and difficult to digest, which means that the panda must eat large amounts of bamboo and then rest most of the days. An adult panda can eat about 12 kilograms of fresh bamboo per day, and they are picky eaters. The bamboo provided has to be fresh, and at least twice as much as they can eat. Zoos that have acquired giant pandas often raise ticket prices in the hope of covering the cost, but the number of visitors often drops off after the first craze. For example, even though the Australian government paid the 1 million AUD annual rent for the pandas, the Adelaide Zoo is in debt after spending about 8 million AUD to build a special habitat for the pandas. Pandas Funi and Wang Mang did not contribute 600 million AUD to the South Australian economy in 10 years' time, as predicted, but only brought in a total of 28 million AUD in their most popular years. Despite the high cost, the number of countries leasing the pandas has thrived. In 2011, Beijing started a multi-billion-dollar negotiation with Scotland to supply salmon, petrochemicals, and renewable energy technology. Beijing leased a pair of pandas to the Edinburgh Zoo in exchange for oil drilling technology and key renewable energy technologies. Panda could even link to China's nuclear ambition. France got their leased pandas after signing a multi-billion-dollar uranium export agreement with Beijing. Australia, with the world's largest uranium reserves, acquired a pair of pandas in 2009 after agreeing to supply uranium to China in 2006. The lease of the panda to the Adelaide Zoo was announced at the 2007 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Sydney. On that same day, then Australian Prime Minister John Howard announced plans for an annual security dialogue with China. In 2012, China announced that it would lend 2 pandas each to the Toronto Zoo and the Calgary Zoo, which partly contributed to the success of the China-Canada trade dialogue, especially the finalization of the Foreign Investment Protection Agreement that had been negotiated for almost 20 years, in addition to Canada's agreement to export uranium to China. Since then, the Chinese embassies in the 2 cities have held a number of Let Canadians Know China activities related to the pandas in the zoos. The new home of the pandas at Berlin's Tierpark Zoo opened just before the G20 summit in Hamburg in 2017. The opening ceremony was attended by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Kathleen Buckingham of Oxford University said, "Every zoo has a lion or a tiger, but not all of them have pandas. China remains selective in host countries for pandas in order to maintain this rarity and its value." China's forestry ministry, zoos, and panda breeding facilities not only earn considerable income from leasing pandas, but also opportunities for staff and governors to visit foreign countries. China is sparing no effort to promote its own pandas. However, Chinese media reported most of the funds obtained through panda leasing have been used to build breeding centers and even to catch wild pandas in the name of conservation. In the beginning of the 1990s, the leasing of pandas was organized by the China Association of Zoological Gardens, but with the intervention of the government that joined later to share profit, it resulted in 2 parallel systems managing the pandas together with poor information exchange. That was the reason why China never disclosed the complete bloodline genealogy of leased pandas and the number of pandas captured. Beijing even uses the pandas as diplomatic hostages. In 2019, for example, when the US-China trade war broke out, China scrapped its conservation loan agreement with the US and recalled 2 pandas, Bai Yun and her 6-year-old cub, Xiaoli Wu, from the San Diego Zoo in California.
从中美建交的第一天起，美方就清楚地知道中国是共产党领导的社会主义国家。40多年过去了，中国共产党领导依然是中国特色社会主义的最本质的特征。
That is why more and more people regard pandas as another white elephant. It is true that countries, zoos, scientists, and research institutions around the world have put enormous effort into the conservation of pandas. But are these resources really utilized? Or is this just a world-class public relations project of the Chinese Communist Party? As more and more countries return their pandas to China, it seems that they already know the answer.